All right, for today's lesson, we're going to be talking about the inheritance of traits and how the environment affects traits. You're probably wondering, Miss DeGennaro, what are traits? Well, traits are features or characteristics of an animal or plant. So, for example, dogs have different traits through their coat color and their body size, such as being black, brown, or white, or small, medium, or large. And these things are different traits that make dogs different from one another, just like you and all your classmates have different traits through your hair color, or your eye color, or your height. You're all different. And these traits can sometimes be changed by the environment, which is just another way of saying where the animal or plant lives, or their diet, which is another way of saying what the animal or plant eats and drinks. And usually, these traits are changed because it helps the animal or plant survive. So, how does the environment affect traits? Well, there are three major things, and the first one is temperature. And temperature has plants and animals developing traits that help them survive in their environment temperature. So right here we see mini Miss DeGennaro. She's really cold. If she constantly lived somewhere really cold, she'd have to develop some traits that help her survive and stay warm. Next up, we've got light. Plants and animals develop traits based on how much sunlight they receive and how much heat they can absorb from the sunlight. So right here we see mini Miss DeGennaro nice and warm. She's absorbing a lot of heat from the sun, but not all animals and plants get enough sunlight or enough heat, so they have to adapt and change their traits so that they can survive. Lastly, we've got a lack of water and resources. So if plants don't have enough water or animals don't have enough water and food, they have to develop traits that are going to help them store water and store food so that they can survive in their environment on their diet. So let's go over some examples. First up, our first example is the Himalayan rabbits. And Himalayan rabbits live in the Himalayan mountains, which get really cold. So Himalayan rabbits' traits are actually affected by both the temperature and the light. And what are some traits that stand out to you about the Himalayan rabbit? Do you notice anything different about this rabbit? I bet you're wondering, how come they have black ears and a black nose, black feet, and black tail? Well, did you know that lighter colors reflect light and absorb less heat, while darker colors absorb heat from light? It's kind of like how the blacktop gets really hot on a sunny day. So the dark pavement over here absorbs heat really well because it's so dark, while the light pavement over here doesn't absorb heat and actually reflects it and keeps it cool. So back to our Himalayan rabbits, can you guess why their ears, nose, feet, and tail have to turn black? Well, those are the coldest areas of its body, so by having them turn black, it helps them absorb heat, just like the black pavement does when you're at recess. And the black fur on the rabbit's ears, nose, feet, and tail is a trait of the Himalayan rabbit, and their fur actually turned black in those spots because that trait was affected by the temperature of the rabbit's environment. So temperature actually does change the traits, and it actually triggers these traits to show up in the Himalayan rabbits, because if they lived somewhere warmer, they would actually just stay white like this. So for example, this rabbit here on the left was raised in an environment at 60 degrees, so it was really cold. So when he was born, he came out with black ears, nose, feet, and tail so that he could stay warm in a cold environment. While this rabbit over here, all white, he was raised in an environment at 85 degrees, so he came out all white because he knew he was coming out into a warm environment that he wouldn't need to absorb as much heat from. So how does diet affect traits? Well, an example we have is through different birds, and different birds eat different types of food, which makes them have different traits. And these traits usually end up looking a little different through their beaks, and it helps them survive and eat their diet more easily. So can you guess what kinds of food each of these birds eat based off of their beak traits? They're all a little bit different. We've got a long skinny one here, a scooping bill beak, a broad deep beak, and a tiny little beak. So let's go over those. So different birds have different beaks to help them eat different diets. So the first ones we're going to look at are our big, broad, deep beaks. So these big, broad, deep beaks are used for crushing seeds, crushing nuts, and eating flowers and fruit buds. Next up, we've got our birds that have long, skinny beaks. And these long, skinny beaks are used for eating nectar and eating insects out of plants and sand and dirt and trees. Next up, we've got birds that have really short little beaks, and these birds with short, small beaks are used for eating leaves and small insects. So, now that you know all that, Can you guess what kinds of food each of these birds eat based off of their beak's traits? Let's try. First up, we've got the hummingbird. Remember, the hummingbird has a long, skinny beak. So what kind of food do you think the hummingbird eats? That's right. Hummingbirds use their long, skinny beak to eat nectar from flowers, insects from trees, and they also eat tree sap. Next up, we've got the duck. And ducks have this scoop-like bill. So their short, scooping bill, what do you think they might eat, and how do you think they eat it? Well, ducks actually use their bill to dig up snails, worms, and insects from the bottom of the lake from mud and dirt. Next up, we've got this finch, and this finch has a big, broad, deep beak. What kind of food do you think this bird eats? That's right, they eat nuts, seeds, fruit buds, and fruits, and they need that big, deep beak because it's used to crack open hard seeds and nuts and fruits. Last up, we have a small bluebird. The bluebird has a small, tiny, short beak. What do you think that beak is good for? That's right, these small beaks are good for eating small insects, worms, tiny seeds, and pollen. And all these birds have different beaks because their environment offers different kinds of food. And in order to survive and eat that food, they had to change to be able to get it. Next example that's affected by diet is giraffes. Giraffes are another animal where their diet affects their traits. So because giraffes live in the savannah that has so many different animals all trying to eat the same food, they had to adapt over time so that they could survive in their environment and get food over the competition. So, because giraffes live in the savannah with so many other animals that all like to eat the same thing as giraffes traits became affected by their diet to help them survive. One way was through the really, really long necks. Their necks can get up to 6 feet long, and that happened over time to help them adapt so that they could eat the leaves from the top of trees, where no other animal can reach, and therefore they get all the food they need, and they're not competing with the other animals. Also, giraffes have really super strong tongues that help them pull the leaves and branches off acacia trees. Because these branches are so strong, the trait of their tongue had to change so that they could get those tree branches off. And also, see those spiky thorns on the acacia tree? Well, the giraffe's tongue had to adapt to that as well. And now they have really thick, glue-like saliva that protects them against those thorns. So when they're eating all these thorns, they don't even feel it, and they can survive and eat all the food they want. So our last example, we'll look at a plant, and we're going to look at the cactus today. And the cactus is an example of a plant with traits that are changed by their environment. And another factor that affects the traits of the cacti is the amount of water that the plant receives because of its environment as well. And cacti grow in the desert, which is really hot and really dry, and it doesn't get any rainfall or water, hardly any at all. So the cactus plant had to develop traits that helped it survive in this kind of environment with so little water. So first up, the cactus has a part of it called the stomata. And the stomata is a part of the plant that releases water. And since it's so hot and so dry in the desert, the cactus plant stomata is deep, deep, deep down inside the plant. And that's protecting it from the hot, dry desert winds and air. So, because it's so hot and dry in the desert and gets little rainfall, the cacti plant stomata is deep inside the plant. This also prevents water loss from the plant as well. The cacti also have a thick, waxy coating over all of its thorns, stems, and leaves and skin. And this helps it protect it from the heat and also protects it from water loss. And lastly, the cacti stomata adapted to open only at night, and it's cooler at night too, so that also helps prevent water loss. And these are all traits of the cacti plant that help it survive in the hot, dry desert with little rainfall. One more thing that happens for the cacti plant is when it actually does rain. So when it does rain in the desert, it is quick, and the water is usually gone quickly into the ground too. So the cacti have a root system called rain roots, and rain roots grow when they feel moisture in the ground. So if we look at a regular mesquite tree right here, this tree has long roots that go down into the ground searching for more water. But the cacti plant only has these roots when it rains, and it can collect water immediately out of the top of the ground before it sinks down into the ground. These roots help take in more water, and they also just dry up when they don't need them anymore. So when it's raining, they come out, they soak up all the water they need, and they dry up so that they're not in there anymore. And this is all an adaptation that helps the cacti plant survive in the desert with little rainfall. So a quick review. Traits are characteristics or features of an animal or plant, just like your hair color and eye color are traits of you guys as human beings. The environment an animal or plant lives in has an effect on its traits. The effect is usually an adaptation that happens to help the animal or plant survive in the environment. So if it's too hot or too cold or they don't get enough water, an animal or plant has to change its traits and adapt so that it can survive. Temperature, light, water, and diet are all parts of an environment that can have an effect on an animal's and plant's traits. For example, to survive the heat and lack of water, the cacti plant had to adapt by storing water during the day and developing a waxy coating to protect it from the heat. And that's all for this lesson. See you in class.